"You'll never amount to anything," he said, and those 5 words carved themselves into my soul like a brand, searing hot and permanent. But 10 years later, as I sit in the corner office reviewing his termination papers, I realize they became the fuel that burned everything down and built me back up again. The memory hits me with crystal clarity even now. Professor Martin Harrison, towering over my desk in that cramped graduate program office, his cologne suffocating and his smile cold as winter steel. I can still feel the heat creeping up my neck, the way my hands trembled as I clutched my rejected thesis proposal, the sound of other students pretending not to notice my humiliation. I was 24 then, naive enough to believe that hard work and passion were enough. My research on sustainable energy solutions had consumed 2 years of my life, every equation calculated with obsessive precision, every hypothesis tested until my eyes burned from staring at computer screens. I'd thought I was onto something revolutionary, a breakthrough that could change how we approached renewable energy storage. But Harrison saw it differently. The way he spoke to me that day, like I was some foolish child playing with toys beyond my comprehension. His words dripped with condescension as he explained how my methodology was flawed, my conclusions premature, my entire approach fundamentally misguided. He didn't just reject my work, he dismantled my confidence piece by piece, with surgical precision. And then came those words, "You'll never amount to anything," not as constructive criticism, not as motivation, as a verdict. Final and absolute. I remember stumbling out of his office, my vision blurry with unshed tears, my thesis proposal crumpled in my sweaty palm. The hallway felt endless, each step echoing like a countdown to my academic death. Other graduate students averted their eyes, probably grateful it wasn't them facing Harrison's wrath. That night I sat in my studio apartment, surrounded by textbooks and research papers that suddenly felt worthless. The rejection letter would come later, formally ending my doctoral aspirations, but I already knew it was over. Harrison had made sure of that. His influence in the department was absolute. If he said I wasn't PhD material, no one would dare disagree. I cried until my eyes were raw and swollen. Not the quiet, dignified tears of disappointment, but ugly, gasping sobs that shook my entire body. I felt small, insignificant, exactly how he'd intended me to feel. But somewhere in that darkness, something else began to take shape. A cold, hard kernel of determination that would grow slowly over the next decade, fed by every slight, every struggle, every moment when I wanted to give up, but didn't. The next morning, I withdrew from the program, but I didn't disappear. While Harrison continued his comfortable tenure, publishing papers and collecting accolades, I threw myself into the private sector with the desperate hunger of someone who had everything to prove. I took a junior research position at a small renewable energy startup, working 18-hour days for barely above minimum wage. The office was a converted warehouse, the equipment was outdated, and the coffee was terrible. I didn't care. Every calculation I completed, every prototype I built, every small breakthrough I achieved was a finger raised in defiance of Harrison's prophecy. I learned everything I could about business, about management, about the industry that Harrison observed from his ivory tower, but never truly understood. The startup failed after 2 years, but I'd learned valuable lessons about what not to do. The next company lasted longer. Then the next? Each failure taught me something new. Each success built my reputation. I developed a network of contacts, a portfolio of patents, a growing understanding of how academic theory translated, or failed to translate, into real-world applications. Years blurred together in a haze of conference calls, prototype testing, and strategic planning. I changed companies, changed roles, changed entire career trajectories when necessary, but I never changed my goal. Deep down, buried beneath layers of professional accomplishment and growing confidence, the memory of Harrison's words burned like a pilot light, ready to ignite at a moment's notice. I started tracking his career obsessively. Social media made it easy. He was active on LinkedIn, posting about his research grants and speaking engagements. I learned that he'd been appointed department head, that his salary was public record, that his research focused on theoretical frameworks that rarely made it beyond peer-reviewed journals. While he theorized, I implemented. While he published, I patented. While he taught, I led. The irony wasn't lost on me that my success was built on the very research he'd dismissed. The sustainable energy storage solutions that had been fundamentally flawed, in his estimation, were now generating millions in revenue across multiple companies. My approach, refined through years of real-world testing, had become industry standard. But success, I discovered, was only satisfying to a point. Money was nice. Recognition was gratifying. But they didn't fill the hollow space that Harrison's words had carved out. Nothing could do that except proving him wrong in the most direct way possible. The opportunity came in my 8th year in the industry. Meridian Energy Solutions, one of the largest renewable energy corporations in the country, was looking for a new director of research and development. The position would give me oversight of multiple departments, including their emerging technologies division. It would also give me the authority to oversee their university partnership programs, including their collaboration with Harrison's department. I spent 3 months preparing for that interview process, studying every aspect of Meridian's business model, their current projects, their long-term strategic goals. I knew their financial reports better than their own accountants. I understood their technology pipeline better than their current R&D director. The interview was more of a formality. By then, my reputation in the industry was solid enough that they were essentially recruiting me rather than evaluating me. But I treated it with the gravity of a final exam because in many ways, it was. When they offered me the position, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pure, unadulterated joy. Not the complicated satisfaction of professional achievement, but the simple pleasure of a plan coming together exactly as envisioned. My first month at Meridian was spent learning the internal systems, meeting key stakeholders, and establishing my authority. I was methodical about it, understanding that respect had to be earned even when power was granted. I made strategic alliances, identified potential challenges, and began implementing changes that would improve efficiency while demonstrating my competence. But through it all, I was thinking about Harrison. The university partnership review was scheduled for my 3rd month. It was routine, really, an annual assessment of which academic collaborations were generating value for the company and which were simply burning through budget allocations. Most years, it was handled by middle management, a bureaucratic exercise in box checking. This year, I decided to handle it personally. I spent weeks reviewing every partnership, every research grant, every collaborative project. I analyzed return on investment, practical applications, publication impact, and commercial viability. I built spreadsheets and flowcharts and presentation decks that would make McKinsey consultants weep with envy. And I saved Harrison's department for last. The numbers were damning. Over 5 years, they'd received nearly $2 million in research funding from Meridian. Their output? 17 academic papers, 3 conference presentations, and 0, absolutely 0, commercially viable innovations. Harrison's pet projects were elegant theoretical exercises that looked impressive in journals, but had no practical application. His students were well-trained in academic methodology, but utterly unprepared for industry demands. His department was, in essence, an expensive academic vanity project that generated prestige for the university while providing no tangible value to its corporate sponsor. I could have simply terminated the partnership. A clean, efficient business decision that would save the company money while removing an underperforming vendor. It would have been professional, rational, and completely unsatisfying. Instead, I scheduled a face-to-face meeting. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as I prepared for what would be our first encounter in nearly 10 years. I was now in a position to judge his work, to evaluate his contributions, to determine his professional fate, exactly the reverse of our last meeting. I chose my outfit carefully that morning. A tailored navy suit that projected authority without arrogance, paired with the expensive watch I'd bought myself after my first major patent sale. Professional, successful, unimpeachable. I wanted to look like exactly what I'd become, someone who had definitely amounted to something. The university campus looked smaller than I remembered as I walked toward the engineering building. Students hurried past, backpacks slung over shoulders, absorbed in their phones or conversations. I'd been like them once, full of idealistic energy and academic ambition. Now I felt like I was visiting a past life, a place I'd outgrown and left behind. Harrison's office was in the same location, though it had been renovated since my last visit. The nameplate on the door read, "Martin Harrison, Department Head," in tasteful gold lettering. I knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a small power play that set the tone for what was to come. He looked up from his desk, and for a moment, I saw the exact same dismissive expression I remembered from a decade earlier. Then, recognition flickered across his features, followed quickly by confusion and what might have been concern. He'd aged, I noted with satisfaction. His hairline had receded significantly, and his face had the soft, pallid look of someone who spent too much time indoors. He was still wearing a bow tie, some things never changed, but it looked more like a costume now than a fashion choice. I introduced myself with my full title, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to surprise to something approaching panic. He clearly hadn't connected my name with his former student until that moment. The realization that his professional fate was now in the hands of someone he'd once dismissed was written across his face in stark, beautiful clarity. The meeting itself was almost anticlimactic. I presented my analysis with the same methodical precision I'd once brought to my rejected thesis proposal. The numbers spoke for themselves. His department's partnership with Meridian was a financial drain with no measurable return on investment. Harrison tried to defend his work, to explain the value of theoretical research, to emphasize the importance of long-term thinking over short-term profit. His arguments were sophisticated and articulate, exactly the kind of academic rhetoric that had once intimidated me into silence. But I wasn't the uncertain graduate student he remembered. I was now someone with the authority to dismiss his arguments as easily as he'd once dismissed mine. I let him finish his presentation, nodding politely at appropriate intervals, maintaining the professional courtesy he'd never shown me. Then I delivered my verdict with the same cold precision he'd once used to destroy my confidence. The partnership would be terminated effective immediately. Existing projects would be concluded but not renewed. Future collaboration would depend on the department's ability to demonstrate practical, commercially viable research outcomes. I watched the color drain from his face as I explained the decision. This wasn't just about money. Losing Meridian's partnership would damage his department's reputation, potentially affecting future funding opportunities and his own standing within the university. Academic careers had been derailed by less significant setbacks. As I gathered my materials to leave, Harrison finally found his voice. He asked if there was any way to salvage the partnership, any concessions he could make, any research directions that might be more aligned with commercial interests. His tone was respectful now, almost pleading. The condescension was gone, replaced by the desperate politeness of someone who recognized their precarious position. It was a complete reversal of our dynamic from 10 years earlier, and I savored every moment of it. I paused at the door and looked back at him, sitting behind his desk in his expensive office with his impressive diplomas and prestigious awards. He looked smaller now, diminished by the realization that all his academic achievements meant nothing if they couldn't generate real-world value. That's when I allowed myself a small smile and delivered the line I'd been rehearsing for years. I told him that perhaps, with significant changes to his research focus and methodology, there might be opportunities for future collaboration. But based on his current track record, I wasn't optimistic about his department's ability to produce work that would amount to anything significant. The word choice was deliberate, surgical. I watched him flinch as the phrase hit home, watched him realize that his own words from a decade earlier were being returned to him with compound interest. I left his office and walked across campus with a lightness in my step that I hadn't felt in years. The late afternoon sun seemed brighter, the air cleaner, the world more vivid. It was the feeling of a weight being lifted, of a debt being paid, of a circle being completed. But as I drove back to Meridian, the euphoria began to fade, replaced by something more complex and harder to define. I'd achieved exactly what I'd set out to do. I'd proven Harrison wrong in the most definitive way possible. His casual cruelty had been answered with professional consequences that would follow him for the rest of his career. So why didn't it feel more satisfying? That evening, I sat in my home office, looking out at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. My house was in the hills, expensive enough to make a statement, modern enough to reflect my success. The kind of place that announced its owner had definitely amounted to something. I pulled up Harrison's LinkedIn profile one more time, noting that he hadn't posted anything since our meeting 3 days earlier. His department's website still listed the Meridian partnership as active, but that would change soon enough. I wondered what he was feeling right now, whether he was lying awake staring at the ceiling the way I had all those years ago. The thought should have brought me satisfaction. Instead, it left me feeling oddly empty. Over the following weeks, I threw myself back into my work with renewed energy. The Harrison situation had been a distraction, an old wound that had finally been cleaned and closed. Now I could focus on more important things, expanding Meridian's research capabilities, developing new technologies, building the kind of innovative culture that would drive the company forward. But late at night, when the office was empty and the city was quiet, I found myself thinking about that young graduate student who'd walked into Harrison's office with such hope and enthusiasm. That person had died in that meeting, replaced by someone harder, more cynical, more successful, but also more alone. The revenge had been perfect in its execution and devastating in its impact. I'd proven my point beyond any reasonable doubt, but I couldn't escape the feeling that in destroying Harrison's certainty about my potential, I'd also destroyed something in myself. 6 months later, I received an unexpected email from Harrison's department. It was from one of his graduate students, a young woman named Sarah Chen, who was working on battery technology research that showed genuine promise. She'd heard about my background in the field and was wondering if I might be willing to review her preliminary findings. Her message was respectful but confident, exactly the tone I'd tried to strike in my own correspondence with Harrison years earlier. I could see the enthusiasm and hope behind her formal language, the same energy I'd once brought to my own research. I almost deleted the email without responding. Getting involved with Harrison's students would be a complication I didn't need, and it risked reopening wounds I'd worked hard to heal. But something in her message reminded me of myself at that age, before cynicism and disappointment had calcified around my ambitions like scar tissue. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet with her. Sarah turned out to be brilliant, not just academically, but in the way that mattered for practical application. Her research was thorough, her methodology sound, her conclusions both innovative and commercially viable. In 20 minutes, she showed me more promising work than her advisor had produced in 5 years. As I listened to her presentation, I realized that Harrison's greatest failure wasn't his dismissal of my potential, it was his inability to recognize and nurture genuine talent when it appeared in his own department. Sarah's work was exactly the kind of breakthrough that could revolutionize energy storage, but she was getting no support from her advisor and no attention from industry partners. That's when I made a decision that surprised me more than anyone. I offered her an internship at Meridian. Not to spite Harrison, though that was certainly a pleasant side effect, but because she deserved the opportunity to see her research translated into real-world applications. Because she had the potential to achieve something significant, and I was now in a position to help her realize that potential. The irony wasn't lost on me. By nurturing Harrison's student, I was becoming the mentor I'd wished I'd had at her age. The guidance and support that had been denied to me, I could now provide to someone else. Sarah accepted the internship immediately, and within 6 months, her battery technology research had been fast-tracked for patent applications and commercial development. Her work would eventually generate millions in revenue for Meridian and establish her as one of the leading researchers in her field. Harrison predictably was furious. He accused me of poaching his student, of undermining his authority, of using my corporate position to interfere with academic freedom. His complaints fell on deaf ears. Sarah had chosen her own path, and the university administration was more interested in the prestige of having their students succeed in industry than in protecting their department head's wounded ego. Watching Sarah's career flourish gave me more satisfaction than Harrison's professional setback ever had. She was brilliant and driven and completely unpretentious. Everything I'd once been before disappointment had taught me to armor myself with cynicism. Through her success, I could remember what pure ambition felt like, untempered by revenge or resentment. Years passed. Meridian continued to grow under my leadership, developing technologies that were changing how the world approached renewable energy. We won awards, made acquisitions, went public, and made a lot of people very wealthy. My name appeared on Forbes lists and conference programs and patent applications that would outlive me by generations. Harrison's career, by contrast, stagnated. The loss of Meridian's partnership had indeed damaged his reputation, and subsequent funding applications were viewed with increased skepticism. His department was eventually merged with another, and his role was reduced to a largely ceremonial position. He published fewer papers, spoke at fewer conferences, and gradually faded from prominence in his field. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant, proven right in the most definitive way possible. Instead, I felt tired. The revenge I'd planned so carefully and executed so precisely had achieved everything I'd intended. Harrison had been professionally humbled, his casual cruelty answered with real consequences. His prediction about my potential had been proven spectacularly wrong, while his own limitations had been exposed for all to see. But in the end, what had it really accomplished? The young graduate student he'd wounded no longer existed. That person had been replaced by someone more successful, but also more calculating, more defensive, more alone. The idealistic researcher who'd believed that good work would be recognized and rewarded had died in Harrison's office that day, and no amount of professional success could bring him back. Sometimes, late at night in my corner office, I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken a different path. If I'd responded to Harrison's cruelty with grace rather than revenge. If I'd used his dismissal as motivation to prove my worth rather than as justification for destroying his, would I still have achieved the same level of success? Would I be happier? Would I have become a different kind of person? Someone who built others up rather than tearing them down? I'll never know. The path I chose led me here, to this office, with these accomplishments and this strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness that comes with getting exactly what you thought you wanted. But I do know this. When young researchers reach out to me for guidance, as they increasingly do, I remember what it felt like to have my dreams dismissed with casual cruelty. I remember the damage that thoughtless words can do to someone's confidence, and I try to be the mentor I needed at that age. Not because I've forgiven Harrison, I haven't, and probably never will, but because revenge, however perfectly executed, can't repair the damage that cruelty creates. The only thing that can do that is choosing to be better than the people who hurt us. Sarah Chen is now a vice president at Meridian, leading a team of researchers who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in renewable energy. Her work will probably win Nobel Prizes and save the planet and inspire a generation of young scientists to believe that their wildest ambitions are achievable. And when she gives interviews about her success, as she increasingly does, she always mentions the importance of having mentors who believe in your potential, who see possibilities where others see limitations. She never mentions Harrison by name, but she doesn't need to. The contrast between his approach and mine speaks for itself. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming so much better than them that their opinions become irrelevant. It's building something beautiful on the ruins of what they tried to tear down. It's proving that their cruelty was not just wrong, but ultimately powerless to define who you become. Harrison was wrong about my potential, and I spent 10 years proving it. But the real victory wasn't in his professional downfall. It was in discovering that I could be the kind of person who lifts others up rather than tearing them down. It was in learning that success without purpose is just expensive emptiness, and that the most meaningful achievements are the ones that create opportunities for others. "You'll never amount to anything," he said. And in a way, he was right. The person he said that to really never did amount to anything. That person died in his office that day, replaced by someone harder, more determined, and ultimately more successful. But also, I hope, more human. The young graduate student who believed that passion and hard work were enough was naive and idealistic and ultimately unsustainable in a world that rewards cynicism over sincerity. But he also had something that the successful executive I became took years to rediscover: the ability to see potential in others without calculating the benefit to himself. Harrison's cruelty taught me that the world could be a brutal place, that talent without politics was often powerless, that good work wasn't always rewarded with recognition. Those were valuable lessons, even if they came at a terrible price. But it took Sarah's success to teach me something even more important, that the real measure of achievement isn't what you accomplish for yourself, but what you make possible for others. The patents and profits and prestigious positions are just scorekeeping. The real game is building something that outlasts your own ambitions. I keep Harrison's old business card in my desk drawer, not as a trophy but as a reminder. A reminder of how casual cruelty can derail someone's life, and how the power to build or destroy someone's confidence should never be wielded lightly. I've become someone who definitely amounted to something, but more importantly, I've become someone who helps others do the same. In the end, that's a better revenge than anything I could have planned.